In a small town in Japan, near the quiet sea and the smell of rain on old streets, lived a boy named Ren. He was only 8 years old, but people already called him strange. He didn't talk much, he didn't laugh loudly, and he never joined the noisy games the other kids played in the schoolyard. While the rest of the children ran around shouting and chasing each other, Ren would sit under a tree with his small notebook, drawing little shapes that looked like waves, clouds, and music notes. He didn't even know why he drew them. He just felt calm when he did. At home, his mother worked long hours at a small bakery, and Ren spent most evenings alone. The television stayed off, and the sound of the outside world faded away. But every night there was one sound that always stayed in his memory: the sound of the piano. Years ago, before Ren could even tie his shoes properly, his father used to play an old upright piano in the corner of their house. His father's music filled every room. Soft and warm like sunlight through the window, Ren would sit near his father's feet. Watching his fingers move across the keys, he didn't understand what the music meant, but it made him feel safe. It was like a secret language between them. One night, his father had smiled at him and said, "Music can talk, even when words can't." Those words stayed in Ren's heart forever, but one cold winter morning everything changed. His father never came home. There was an accident on his way back from work. After that day, the piano became silent. The house that once sang now felt empty. His mother couldn't bear to hear the instrument anymore. She covered it with a white sheet, and dust began to settle on it like forgotten snow. Ren stopped talking much after that. He answered when someone asked him something, but only with a few words. Teachers said he was polite but distant. Classmates didn't understand him. Some even laughed at how quiet he was. They whispered behind his back and gave him nicknames. They thought he was odd because he never fought back, but Ren didn't care about their words. Every day after class he walked to the music room not to talk or play, but just to listen. From outside the door he could hear the piano being played by other students during practice. Some were good, some were not, but he didn't mind. Even broken melodies made his heart beat faster. He would close his eyes and imagine what it would be like to play again, to feel those keys under his fingers. Sometimes the teacher would find him sitting quietly by the door. She would smile and say, "Ren, do you want to come inside?" But he always shook his head. He didn't want to touch the piano in the school because it felt like a promise to his father that he wasn't ready to keep yet. At home, he would sneak into the corner where the old piano stood under the white cloth. He would lift it gently and touch the keys. Some of them didn't make any sound anymore. Some sounded sharp and broken, but he still pressed them softly, one after another, creating small tunes that only he could understand. It was his secret world, a place where he could still talk to his father. Sometimes when his mother came home late and tired, she would hear faint notes drifting through the quiet house. She would stop outside his door listening. Her eyes would fill with tears. But she never said anything. She knew her son missed his father in his own quiet way. At school, Ren continued to stay silent. He didn't raise his hand in class, didn't tell jokes, didn't share lunch with others, but every time someone played the piano, his eyes would light up for just a second. The teacher noticed it once down that small spark, and wondered what story hid behind it. One day during music class, the teacher asked the students what instrument they liked the most. Some said guitar, some said drums, some shouted violin. But when it was Ren's turn, he simply said piano. His voice was soft but clear, and the class went quiet for a moment. It was one of the few times they had heard him speak with certainty. That moment was small, but it mattered. It showed there was something deep inside him waiting to come out. The world didn't know it yet, but Ren carried a gift in his silence, something beautiful that words could never explain. He didn't know it either, not fully. All he knew was that the sound of the piano made his heart feel alive again, even after years of quiet. When he heard those notes, he remembered warmth, laughter, and his father's gentle smile. To everyone else, Ren was just a quiet boy who didn't fit in, but inside him lived music that was waiting to be heard. It wasn't just talent, it was emotion, memory, and love. His silence wasn't emptiness, it was full of sound that hadn't yet found a way out, and soon, without knowing it, his quiet world was going to collide with the noisy one around him. The day would come when the same classmates who laughed at him would see what silence can hold. They would see that sometimes the ones who speak the least have the most powerful voices, not through words, but through music. The rain had been falling since morning, turning the schoolyard into a sea of puddles. Children ran with umbrellas, their laughter mixing with the soft drumming of water on the roof. Inside Class 3B, the teacher stood in front of the board with a bright smile. She clapped her hands and said, "Next week we'll have our talent day." Her voice was cheerful, and everyone started whispering excitedly. "Talent day?" one of the boys shouted. "So we get to show off what we can do?" "Yes," the teacher replied. "You can sing, dance, play music, tell stories, or even do magic tricks." The room filled with energy. Every student had something to show, or at least they thought they did. Everyone except Ren. Ren sat in the back corner, his small hands folded on the desk. He looked out the window, watching the rain slide down the glass. He didn't raise his hand or speak. He didn't need to because everyone already knew he wouldn't volunteer. A few boys from the front row turned their heads and grinned at each other. One of them, Kaido, whispered, "Hey, wouldn't it be funny if Ren performed?" The others laughed. "Yeah, he never talks. What could he even do? Maybe he can stand there and stare at us." They giggled, whispering louder until the teacher asked for silence. But the idea had already planted itself like a small, cruel seed. After class, the students gathered near the window, making plans for Talent Day. Some were excited about singing, some were practicing dances, and a few were bringing instruments from home. Kaido and his group watched Ren pack his bag quietly. Kaido smirked and said, "Hey Ren, what are you going to do for Talent Day?" Ren looked up, blinking as if he hadn't heard the question. "Nothing," he said softly. The boys laughed. "Come on, you have to do something." "Oh wait, maybe you can play the piano." Ren froze for a second. His eyes shifted toward the corner of the classroom, where an old piano stood. Its brown wood was scratched, its lid half broken. It had been sitting there for years, untouched, except when someone pressed a few keys as a joke. Kaido grinned wider. "Yeah, the broken piano. You should play it for everyone. Ren!" The group burst into laughter. One of them added, "That would be so funny. The quiet boy trying to make music out of trash." Ren didn't answer. He just looked at the piano for a moment. His face showed no anger, no sadness, only silence. Then he nodded slightly. "Okay," he said, and walked out of the room. The boys stopped laughing for a moment. "Wait, did he just agree?" Kaido said, "Oh man, this is going to be hilarious." That night, Ren couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, listening to the sound of rain tapping against his window. His mother had gone to bed early after another long day at work. The house was quiet, except for the faint ticking of the wall clock. He turned his head toward the old piano covered with its white sheet. His father's piano. Slowly, he got up and walked toward it. His fingers lifted the cloth like a curtain hiding an old memory. The keys looked yellow and tired, but they still called out to him. Ren sat down, pressing one key gently. It made a strange sound, part note, part silence. But he smiled. He began to press more keys, finding little patterns filling the air with broken, beautiful sound. The next morning at school, everyone was still talking about Talent Day. Some kids teased Ren again. "You really gonna play that broken piano?" "Huh?" Ren just nodded quietly as always. But inside, something had changed. He didn't feel nervous or scared. Instead, he felt a calm kind of excitement. The teacher announced the final list for the show, and beside Ren's name she wrote, "Piano performance," the class whispered and giggled. "Can you believe it?" One girl said, "He's actually doing it." Days passed quickly, and Talent Day finally arrived. The rain had stopped, and sunlight poured through the classroom windows. The desks were pushed to the sides, and a small space was cleared in front. A microphone stood on a wooden box, and the old piano waited in the corner. Ren sat quietly in the audience as his classmates performed one by one. There were songs, dances, and even a funny magic act that made everyone laugh. Then the teacher looked down at her list. Next, we have Ren, playing the piano. The room fell into a strange silence. Some kids grinned, ready to laugh. Others leaned forward. Curious, Ren stood up slowly and walked toward the piano. His shoes made small sounds on the wooden floor. He could feel everyone's eyes on him. Hundreds of tiny arrows of attention. But he didn't look at anyone. He just stood in front of the piano. Placing his small hands on the dusty keys, someone in the back whispered, "This is gonna be good," and a few others snickered. The teacher was about to say something, maybe to stop the teasing, but she stopped herself when she saw Ren's face. He wasn't scared, his expression was calm. Focused, almost peaceful, he pressed the first key. It made a dull sound slightly out of tune. A few giggles echoed, but then he pressed another, and slowly the sound began to shape into something unexpected. The laughter faded, replaced by silence. His small hands moved faster now, finding melody where there should have been none. His eyes closed, and for the first time, Ren's world, the one filled with memories of his father, with rain, with quiet nights and lost words, and began to speak through music. Each broken note became part of a story only he knew, and somehow the piano, though old and cracked, began to sing with him. The teacher stood frozen, her mouth slightly open. The students forgot to breathe. By the time Ren finished, no one moved. The sound of the last note hung in the air like a dream. And then nothing, silence, deep and heavy. Then slowly, one person clapped, then another, and within seconds, the whole class was on their feet, cheering, shouting, clapping until their hands hurt. Kaito, who had started the prank, looked at Ren with wide eyes, unable to speak. He had wanted to make a joke, but instead, he had awakened something magical. Ren stood, bowed gently, and returned to his seat. He didn't smile, but there was a quiet light in his eyes. The same quiet boy everyone ignored had just silenced an entire room, not with words, but with a gift that no one expected. The first note hung in the air like a fragile drop of rain, trembling but alive. The classroom that had been filled with whispers and quiet laughter just moments before suddenly froze. Ren's small fingers rested on the keys, motionless for a heartbeat. His classmates waited for something funny to happen, a clumsy sound, a broken chord. But what came next was nothing they could have imagined. He pressed another key, then another, and somehow, even though the piano was old and half broken, the melody began to form. It wasn't perfect, yet it was full of emotion. The cracked notes blended with soft ones, and together they painted something beautiful. It was like watching light pour through a stained glass window, flawed, yet mesmerizing. Ren didn't read sheet music. He didn't follow any rules. He simply played what his heart remembered. The sounds that his father once created came back in small fragments. Drifting from his memory to his hands, he didn't think. He just felt. The first few rows of students stopped giggling. The smiles on their faces slowly faded as they stared at him. His head tilted slightly, his eyes half closed. Every movement of his fingers told a story, a quiet story of love, loss, and something beyond words. The piano had once been called broken, but under Ren's touch, it began to breathe again. The dull keys found life. The rusty strings hummed softly as if waking up from a long sleep. The sound wasn't smooth, it was raw, honest, and full of heart. The teacher covered her mouth with her hand. Her eyes widened as she recognized something deep and powerful in the boy's playing. She had taught music for years, but never had she seen a child like this. There was no training, no practice, and only emotion, pure and untouched. Ren's classmates could feel it too. The air in the room seemed heavier, as if the melody itself carried invisible weight. Some kids looked down at their shoes, feeling strange and unsure. They didn't know why, but their chests felt tight. He played softly at first, then louder, letting the sound rise like a wave and fall again like wind through bamboo. The broken keys added a haunting rhythm that made it even more unique. Each note seemed to tell a memory, a father's laughter, a boy's quiet nights, a mother's tired smile, and through all of it, Ren looked peaceful. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He wasn't even aware of the audience anymore. The classroom had disappeared for him. All that existed was the piano and the sound it made. The teacher's eyes filled with tears. She could feel what he was saying without words. It was music that spoke straight to the heart. At the back of the room, Kaido, the boy who had made the joke, sat frozen. He didn't laugh, he didn't move. The guilt began to sink into him like cold water. He had thought it would be funny, but now he felt small. His throat tightened as he watched Ren play. Ren's hands moved faster, as if chasing something only he could hear. The melody shifted, brighter now, hopeful. Like morning light through the rain. The room, the rain outside. The sound of breathing. Everything seemed to move in time with him. Then suddenly the rhythm slowed. The last few notes came softer, gentler, almost like a whisper. His hands rested on the final chord, and the sound lingered in the air before fading away. The silence that followed was deep and strange, the kind that makes people forget to move. No one clapped at first, not because they didn't want to, but because they didn't know how to react. It didn't feel right to break that silence too soon. The moment felt too sacred, too fragile. Ren slowly lifted his head, looking at the piano as if saying goodbye. He stood up quietly, brushed the dust from his hands, and turned to the class. His expression didn't show pride or fear, only calm. Then the teacher started to clap. Softly at first, her hands trembled, and soon others followed. The sound grew louder and louder until it filled the entire room. For the first time since he had entered the school, every pair of eyes looked at Ren not with confusion or mockery, but with respect, admiration, and awe. Kaido's face turned red. He looked down. Unable to meet Ren's eyes, he whispered to his friends, "We were wrong," but his voice was barely audible under the thunder of applause. Ren gave a small bow, just like his father used to do after finishing a song. Then he walked back to his seat. The students moved aside for him as if he were made of something fragile and holy. When he sat down, the teacher placed a gentle hand on his shoulder and whispered, "That was beautiful, Ren." He nodded slightly. Still lost in his own thoughts, he wasn't thinking about the performance, or the applause, or even the people staring at him. All he could hear was the fading echo of his father's piano. The same melody that used to fill his home long ago. As the noise of the room slowly returned, something had changed. The same students who once ignored or teased him now looked at him differently. Some whispered, "How did he do that?" While others just watched him in silence. The old piano stood there, half broken, half alive. But now everyone saw it differently too. It wasn't just a dusty piece of furniture anymore. It was a doorway to something extraordinary. Ren looked at it one more time before leaving that day. The wooden frame gleamed softly in the afternoon light, and for the first time in years, he smiled, a small, quiet smile. He didn't know it yet, but that moment, that one song played on a broken piano, was going to change everything. It would change how people saw him, how they understood music, and how they listened to silence, because sometimes, true magic doesn't come from perfection. It comes from broken things. When someone loves them enough to make them sing again. The classroom stayed frozen long after the last note faded. The air still hummed faintly. As if the sound had soaked into the walls, no one moved, no one spoke. It was as if time itself had stopped to listen. The rain outside had turned into a soft drizzle, tapping gently against the windows like applause from the sky. Ren sat silently, his fingers still resting on the dusty keys. His eyes were calm, almost distant. He didn't look at anyone. He wasn't searching for praise. He was still lost inside the music he had just played. Then slowly the teacher stood up. Her hands trembled slightly as she pressed them together. The sound of her first clap was soft, respectful, not loud or forced. It echoed through the quiet room like a heartbeat. One by one, the students began to follow. Their claps grew stronger, faster, until the classroom was filled with the sound of thunderous applause. Ren blinked and looked up, confused for a moment. He wasn't used to being the center of attention. His classmates' faces were no longer mocking or amused. They were full of shock, awe, and something new, something that looked like respect. The teacher wiped the corner of her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. She had seen many performances in her career, but never anything like this. What the boy had just played wasn't a simple melody. It was a story, full of pain, love, and hope. Something deep had been hiding inside that child's silence all along. She walked slowly toward him, her shoes clicking softly on the wooden floor. The student stepped aside, still clapping, still watching. The old piano stood proudly behind him, its scratches catching the afternoon light. "Ren?" the teacher whispered gently, her voice shaking. "That was beautiful." He looked up at her, unsure what to say. "Thank you," he replied quietly. His voice was soft. but it carried something that made her heart ache. Kaito, the boy who had started the prank, couldn't lift his head. His face burned with shame. He had wanted to make Ren a joke, but now he wished he could disappear. His hands were still clapping, but his eyes were wet. He didn't even know why. As the noise faded, the teacher turned to the class. "Do you all understand what you just heard?" she asked softly. "This is what it means to feel music," no one answered. The students only looked at Ren, still sitting quietly on the piano bench. The teacher placed her hand gently on Ren's shoulder. "Ren, have you ever taken lessons before?" He shook his head. "No," he said. "I just remember how it sounds." Her eyes widened. "You remember?" He nodded slowly. "My father used to play." Before he went away, his voice broke slightly on the last word. The teacher's heart clenched. She understood now. The emotion she had heard in his playing wasn't random. It was love. It was grief. It was memory turned into sound. She took a deep breath. "Ren, would you play again for the school assembly next week?" He hesitated. His small hands tightened on his knees. "If you want me to," he said softly. "I do," she replied, smiling through her tears. "And I think everyone else does too." The class erupted in cheers. This time it wasn't laughter. It was real, sincere excitement. Even Kaito shouted, "Yeah, Ren! You have to!" Though his voice trembled with guilt, Ren gave a tiny smile, the first one anyone had seen from him in months. That night, when he went home, his mother noticed something different about him. He walked with lighter steps, his eyes looked brighter. She set down her apron and asked, "Ren, what happened at school?" He hesitated for a moment, then smiled shyly. "I played the piano," he said. Her eyes widened. You played it?" He nodded. "The one in the classroom." She stared at him. Speechless then, tears slowly filled her eyes. She sat down and covered her mouth, remembering the old days. The nights when her husband played. The way little Ren used to hum along. He walked over to the piano at home, still covered with its white sheet. He lifted it gently, brushing away the dust. The keys looked dull, but now he wasn't afraid to touch them anymore. His mother stood behind him, her hands trembling. "Would you play something for me?" Ren looked up, surprised. "Now?" She nodded, wiping her eyes. "Yes, please." He placed his hands on the keys. The first sound was soft and uneven, but it soon grew into the same melody he had played at school, the one born from memory and heart. The house that had been silent for years suddenly felt alive again. The walls seemed to breathe. The air felt lighter. His mother cried quietly. Her tears weren't just sadness, they were release. Years of loneliness and grief melting away with every note. When he finished, she hugged him tightly. "Your father would be so proud," she whispered. Her voice broke, but her smile stayed. Ren rested his head on her shoulder, and for the first time in a long while, the house didn't feel empty. It felt like home again at school. Word about his performance spread quickly. Teachers from other classes heard about the boy who played the broken piano. Some thought it was a rumor until they saw him themselves, sitting quietly by the music room, touching the keys with that same gentle focus. Even the principal came one afternoon just to listen. The teacher stood beside him, whispering, "He doesn't play like a child. He plays like someone who's lived through something." Ren didn't understand why everyone suddenly paid attention. He didn't care for the compliments or the applause. For him, it wasn't about showing off. It was about remembering, and somewhere inside, he could feel that his father was listening too, not from a distance, but from every note that echoed softly in the air that day. The teacher realized something important. Talent can be taught, but emotion cannot. What Ren carried wasn't just skill, it was truth. And that truth had moved every single heart that heard him. The boy who never spoke much had finally told his story, not through words, but through music that made even the strongest hearts break and heal at the same time. And from that day forward, the teacher promised herself she would make sure the world heard his gift. The story of Ren's performance spread through the school like wildfire. By the next morning, every classroom seemed to be whispering his name. "Did you hear what happened yesterday? The quiet boy played the piano. They said it was the old broken one." Children who had never noticed Ren before now turned their heads when he walked past. Some smiled at him, some just stared, still not believing what they had heard. Ren didn't understand why everyone was suddenly so kind. He hadn't done anything special, not in his mind. He had only played what was in his heart. The melody still echoed in his head, looping softly as he walked through the hallway. For the first time, he didn't feel invisible that afternoon. The music teacher, Mrs. Tanaka, called Ren to the staff room. She had been thinking about his performance ever since the day it happened. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to his story, something deeper that explained the emotion in his music. "Ren," she said kindly as he stood by the door, "would it be all right if I spoke with your mother?" Ren hesitated. "Did I do something wrong?" Her face softened. No, not at all," she said. "You did something wonderful. I just want to understand where your gift comes from." He nodded quietly, clutching the strap of his school bag. "Okay." That evening, Mrs. Tanaka called his home. Ren's mother answered, her voice polite but cautious. She had been surprised to receive a call from the school, especially from the music teacher. "Your son played something very special this week," Mrs. Tanaka said gently. "It wasn't just talent, it was emotion, pure and deep. I wanted to ask, has he ever learned to play before?" There was a long pause. Then Ren's mother sighed softly. "No, he's never taken lessons," she said. "But his father used to play every night." Mrs. Tanaka's voice lowered. "Ah, I see. May I ask, is his father a musician?" There was another pause. And then quietly, "He was," she said. "He passed away when Ren was 4. The teacher closed her eyes. Her heart ached. She could almost hear the echo of the boy's music again. And suddenly it all made sense, Ren's mother continued, her voice trembling slightly. "After that, Ren stopped talking much. He used to sit near the piano, just touching the keys, not making sound. Sometimes I'd hear faint music at night, soft and broken. I never had the heart to stop him." Mrs. Tanaka felt a tear roll down her cheek. She imagined the small boy sitting alone in a dark room, pressing dusty keys to feel closer to the father he had lost. Every note he played at school must have been a memory of love and loss. "Your son has a gift," she said softly. "It comes from the deepest part of him. I think the world needs to hear it." Ren's mother smiled sadly through the phone. "He's a quiet boy. He doesn't realize how special he is." The next day, Mrs. Tanaka met Ren in the music room after class. The late afternoon sun painted the walls orange and gold. The old piano sat in the corner, its wood glowing softly in the light. "Ren," she said gently, "your mother told me about your father." Ren's hands froze over the keys. He didn't look up, but his eyes softened. "He used to play," he whispered. "I remember the sound." "What kind of sound?" she asked. Ren thought for a moment. "Warm," he said quietly. "Like when you hold a cup of tea on a cold day." It made everything feel okay. Mrs. Tanaka smiled. "That's exactly what your music does for others, too." He looked up at her, surprised. "Really?" "Yes," she said. "You remind people of something pure, something they've forgotten." For a moment, the room was silent except for the faint hum of the city outside. Then Mrs. Tanaka walked over to the piano and ran her fingers across the edge of the keys. "Would you like to learn properly?" she asked. "I can teach you if you want." Ren hesitated. "But I don't have a real piano at home anymore. It's broken." She smiled gently. "So was this one," she said, tapping the piano lightly. "But you brought it back to life." Ren's lips curved into a shy smile. "Okay," he whispered. From that day on, he stayed after school with Mrs. Tanaka. She taught him how to read notes, how to use both hands, how to control his rhythm. But even as he learned, she noticed something. Ren never really needed lessons to feel the music. He didn't just play notes, he spoke through them. Each session felt like watching a bird remembering how to fly. As weeks passed, the news reached other teachers, then the principal, and eventually, the local community center. They invited Ren to play at a small neighborhood concert. It would be his first performance outside school. When Mrs. Tanaka told him, he looked frightened. "I don't know if I can," he said. "You can," she replied softly, "because your father would want you to." On the night of the concert, the small stage was lit with soft yellow lights. People filled the seats whispering, "That's the boy from the school, the one who played the broken piano." Ren stood behind the curtain, holding his small hands together. His mother knelt beside him. Fixing his collar, her eyes were full of pride. "Play like you did that night," she whispered. "Just close your eyes and feel it." When his name was called, he walked slowly onto the stage. The audience fell silent. He sat in front of the grand piano, its polished surface reflecting the lights above. He took a deep breath and placed his fingers on the keys. The first note floated through the hall, gentle as a sigh, and then the music began. Familiar yet new, the same heart, the same soul, but this time stronger, freer. The audience listened in silence, tears in their eyes. Some closed their eyes. Others just watched the small boy whose hands created beauty from nothing. And as the last note faded, Ren lifted his head and smiled softly. In that moment, the quiet boy who had once been a joke had become something else. A voice for everything words could never say. Backstage, Mrs. Tanaka whispered to his mother. "He's not just talented," she said. "He's healing the world, one note at a time." The night of Ren's performance at the community hall became something people in the small town never forgot. The news of the quiet boy who turned a broken piano into something magical spread faster than the autumn wind. By the next morning, the story was in the local newspaper. 8-year-old prodigy silences crowd with emotion. It wasn't just a headline. It was a memory, and one that people wanted to keep. Ren's classmates brought the newspaper to school, showing it around like treasure. "Look, it's really him," one of the girls said, pointing at the photo. There was Ren on stage, eyes closed, hands mid-air over the piano keys, his face calm and glowing under the soft lights. Even Kaido, who had once started the cruel prank, carried a copy folded neatly in his bag. He couldn't explain the feeling inside him. It wasn't guilt anymore, like it was admiration mixed with awe. Every time he looked at Ren, he saw someone who had turned humiliation into harmony, someone stronger than anyone else in the room. At lunch, Kaido finally walked over to Ren's desk. His voice shook a little. "Hey, Ren," he said, I'm sorry about what we did before." Ren looked up. Surprised. "It's okay," he said simply. His tone wasn't cold, just calm, forgiving in the quietest way. Kaido scratched the back of his neck. "No, it's not okay," he insisted. "We made fun of you and you still played anyway." Ren smiled a little. "If you hadn't said it, I might never have tried." Kaido blinked. "You're serious?" Ren nodded. "Sometimes people say mean things, but they don't know it helps. It made me want to play." That was the kind of boy Ren was. He didn't carry anger, he turned pain into sound, sadness into melody. After school that day, Mrs. Tanaka called Ren into the music room again. The piano was freshly polished, the dust gone, it looked alive now. As if proud to be part of his journey, she smiled at him. "Ren, do you know what's happening next week?" He shook his head. "There's a music festival in the city," she said. "I showed them a video of your concert and they want you to perform." Ren froze. "The city?" he whispered. "But I've never gone that far." She nodded. "I know, but this is your chance. The world needs to hear what you can do." His mother, who had been standing by the door, stepped forward and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Your father would be proud, Ren," she said softly. "He always wanted you to find your music." The following week passed in a blur. The city was big, loud, and full of lights. Ren had never seen so many people before. His small hands gripped his mother's tightly as they entered the large concert hall. The ceiling was tall, the stage wide, and the grand piano shone under the lights like a star waiting to be touched. Backstage, Ren sat quietly while other performers warmed up. Some were older children in tuxedos. Others had professional coaches adjusting their sheet music. They whispered to each other when they saw him. The shy boy in a simple shirt, sitting with no papers, no teacher by his side. "Is he really performing?" One girl whispered. "He doesn't even have notes." But Ren didn't hear them. He was staring at the piano through the gap in the curtain, breathing slowly, remembering the first time he had touched a broken key, remembering his father's laughter, remembering his mother crying softly when he played at home. When it was his turn, the announcer's voice echoed through the hall. "Please welcome from Shizuoka Elementary, 8-year-old Ren Sato." The audience clapped politely. Not knowing what to expect, Ren walked out, his small steps steady. He sat before the piano, closed his eyes, and took a deep breath. The lights dimmed slightly, and the first note floated into the air, pure, fragile like the beginning of a dream. This time, his music was fuller. It carried not only sadness but joy, a celebration of everything that had happened. Every key he pressed seemed to tell a piece of his story. From the day of the cruel prank to this moment of triumph, the melody rose and fell like waves. Soft and wild at once, the audience leaned forward. Drawn into his world, they didn't see a boy anymore. They saw emotion itself. small and human and real. His hands moved faster, his eyes still closed, completely lost in the sound. In the front row, Mrs. Tanaka watched with tears streaming down her cheeks. The same tears she had shed the first time he played. But this time they were different. They weren't tears of sadness. They were pride. When the final note came, it was so delicate that it felt like a whisper. The silence that followed was deep. The crowd held their breath. And then suddenly, applause erupted. Loud and endless, people stood from their seats, clapping and cheering. Some shouted, "Bravo!" Others simply cried. Ren stood and bowed just like his father used to. The light shimmered off his small frame. He didn't smile big or wave dramatically. He just bowed once, humbly, gracefully, silently. Backstage after the show, a famous pianist approached him. "How long have you been playing?" she asked with a warm smile. Ren thought for a second. "Since I could remember," he said. She laughed softly. "You have something rare. Boy, never lose it. The world will need music like yours." Ren nodded shyly. "Thank you." When he left the hall that night, the stars were out. The city lights reflected in his mother's eyes as she looked down at him. "You did it, Ren," she whispered. "Your music healed them." He looked up at her and smiled. "It healed me too." As they walked hand in hand through the glowing streets, the sound of applause still echoing in the distance, Ren didn't feel small anymore. He didn't feel strange or different. He felt whole. And somewhere in the quiet sky above the city, it almost felt like his father was listening too, smiling down at the boy who had turned a broken piano into a bridge between hearts. A boy who had once been laughed at, now playing melodies the world would never forget. Years passed like pages turning in a quiet book. The little boy who once sat before a broken piano had grown, but he never let go of the sound that changed his life. Ren was no longer just the shy boy from a small seaside town in Japan. He had become something extraordinary. His music had traveled far beyond the classroom where it was first born. Yet every time he played, his heart returned to that very moment when silence became sound. By the time Ren was 16, people began to call him the boy who healed with music. He didn't play for fame or trophies. He didn't care about grand stages or shining lights. He played for something deeper, for the memory of a father who taught him love through notes, and for the silence that had once been his only friend. He performed in cities, at schools, and even in hospitals. His melodies had a strange power. They calmed crying children, made tired nurses smile, and reminded lonely patients of home. People said his piano didn't just make music, it spoke. But even with all the success, Ren never forgot the place where everything began. One cold winter morning, he took a train back to his old town. The sea breeze carried the same smell of salt and rain. The streets were smaller than he remembered. The bakery where his mother used to work was still there, its windows fogged from the warmth inside. He walked slowly toward his old school. The building looked older now. The paint faded, but the memories inside were alive and clear. The sound of children playing echoed across the yard. He smiled softly. Once he had been one of them. Sitting alone, afraid to speak, the principal greeted him at the gate. Eyes wide with surprise. "Ren Sato?" he said in disbelief. "You came back." Ren bowed politely. "Yes, sir, I wanted to visit the piano." The principal's face softened. "It's still here," he said. "We never threw it away. It's special." They walked through the hallway together. The air was thick with nostalgia, and when they reached the old classroom, Ren stopped at the door. There it was, the same piano, still scratched, still imperfect, sitting in the same corner where it had once waited for him. Ren walked toward it slowly, his footsteps light and careful. He touched the keys with gentle fingers, and even though they were still slightly off tune, a faint smile crossed his lips. The teacher who had believed in him, Mrs. Tanaka, was now retired, but she had left a small note taped inside the piano lid. It said, "This piano once found its voice through a boy who taught us all to listen." Ren's eyes filled with warmth. He sat down, his fingers hovering over the same dusty keys he had played years ago. Children began gathering at the door, whispering, "Is that him? The famous pianist?" He pressed the first key and a soft, trembling sound filled the room. The new generation of students fell silent. The melody he played was the same one from that day, the one that had silenced laughter and turned it into wonder. But this time it was fuller, deeper, more alive. Each note carried not only his childhood but every moment since. Every concert, every tear, every smile. It was a song of return, forgiveness, and love. The teacher standing in the hallway wiped her eyes. "He's playing the same song," she whispered. "The same one that started everything." When Ren finished, the room was so quiet that he could hear the children breathing. A little girl stepped forward shyly and asked, "How did you learn to play like that?" Ren smiled gently. "By listening," he said. "Not to others, but to what's inside." The girl tilted her head. "Even when it hurts?" He nodded. "Especially when it hurts, pain has its own music. You just have to hear it." That afternoon, he called for a small truck to deliver something to the school. The students gathered in curiosity as movers carefully brought in a shining black piano. New, polished, perfect. Ren placed his hand on it and turned to the crowd. "This piano," he said softly, "is for the next student who wants to tell their story." The principal looked shocked. "Ren, you can't just—" But Ren smiled. "I already have one that matters most," he said, nodding toward the old broken piano. "This one taught me everything." He walked up to the old instrument and gently pressed his palm against it. "It wasn't really broken," he whispered. "It was just waiting for someone to listen." The sunlight poured through the window, landing across the worn keys, making them shine like tiny stars. The children stood still, watching the famous pianist bow his head to an old, forgotten piano. Later that evening, as Ren walked toward the train station, he looked back at the school one last time. The sound of children laughing mixed with the faint echo of piano notes drifting from the open window. He smiled, closing his eyes, remembering his father's voice. Music can talk even when words can't. And in that moment, he finally understood what his father had meant all those years ago. Music wasn't just sound, it was connection. It was the bridge between silence and soul, between one heart and another. Ren went on to play across the world. His name appeared in magazines. His performances filled concert halls. But whenever people asked him about his greatest performance, he never mentioned the city, the stage, or the applause. He always said softly, "The best music I ever played was on a broken piano, in a small classroom full of laughter," because that was where he found his true gift, not in perfection, but in the courage to play through imperfection. And so the boy who once couldn't speak, the boy who was laughed at, became a man whose music spoke for millions, but to him, he was still just Ren, the boy who loved a broken piano enough to make it sing again. As the train pulled away from the station, Ren looked out at the sunset painting the sky gold. The reflection shimmered across the window like dancing notes. He smiled softly to himself, somewhere deep inside. He could almost hear his father's piano playing along. 2 melodies, one old, one new, blending perfectly, and just like that, the world's noise faded away, leaving behind what Ren always loved most: silence, soft and peaceful, filled with music only he could hear.